Good evening to our Olelo audience. Welcome to another edition of Bring the World Home, a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. Our show is a program in which each week we explore the experiences and knowledge that volunteers have garnered from their assignment in one of the 132 countries around the world in which the Peace Corps serves. Today we have with us this distinguished looking gentleman next to me, Mr. Willis Moore. Willis, welcome very much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The show. Mr. Moore was a volunteer in Bolivia in South America from 1962 to 1964, and answered one of the early adopters of the Peace Corps ethic, and answered John F. Kennedy's call to serve the United States as a volunteer and overseas. We welcome you here today. We appreciate the opportunity to look back into the early days of Peace Corps history. Each week we begin our program by referring to this globe here. We're out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii, and Bolivia in South America is not too far away, right in the central western part of South America, a landlocked country surrounded by Chile, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, and we'd like to find out a little bit about it. But first, again, thank you for coming today.
Okay.
We're always interested to find out how people such as yourself got interested in the Peace Corps. What stimulated you to decide that you wanted to apply for the Peace Corps? A little bit about the process. You must have been a young man back in 1962.
Well, I was. I come from a background of people who do things for others and don't necessarily expect to be paid an appropriate amount of money.
Okay.
Some of this is religious, but some of it's social concern. And I was 19 years old. I was actually in Hawaii in the summer of 1960 when John F. Kennedy was campaigning for president.
Okay.
And he had proposed the idea of a Peace Corps in that campaign.
Yes.
Nobody had any idea what he meant or what it would look like. Of course, he had to win the election first. So I went back to Norman, Oklahoma to my junior year at the University of Oklahoma in the fall of 1960, and that was the first election that I was able to vote in.
All right, yes.
So that was exciting.
Yeah.
Kennedy won and set to work almost immediately putting together something to be called the Peace Corps. And as you may recall, he chose Sergeant Shriver, family member, to head up the Peace Corps.
As a director, yes.
And obviously they were flying blind in terms of how do we find people, and then if we find people, what do we do with them?
Exactly.
And, you know, the Peace Corps was a work in progress for the early years, and there were lots of learnings. One of the interesting things was they determined it should not be a career, and so no one was going to be career civil service Peace Corps anything.
That's right.
We were to serve for 2 years, and that was it.
And that was
and the people who supervised and who went with us were not going to be career either.
I think that was a good decision.
That was interesting, that everybody had a motivation to do something for a while and then go back to whatever life was going to be. For me, it was graduate school.
Okay.
And the way without the internet and with really pretty lousy phone service, you wrote letters to your senators saying, how do we find out about Peace Corps? Where are the application forms? And things like that, and duly showed up.
And they probably notified you by telegram.
Telegram or letter.
Yeah.
Yes, good old-fashioned Western Union telegram.
So you were a student at the University of Oklahoma. What were you studying, or what had you studied when you graduated?
I was majoring in philosophy, history, and literature, which was an honors program that led absolutely nowhere, except graduate school, where then I was supposed to make up my mind and do something useful.
Okay.
In the early days, I think, Peace Corps attracted a lot of liberal arts folks.
Yes.
And there were, early on, there were some complaining about, gee, we really need electricians and carpenters and plumbers, and what we've got is philosophers, historians.
We need professionals, and we're getting amateurs.
Well, the motivation was there.
That was the most critical aspect.
Because of that, we were fully prepared to live anywhere, sleep anywhere, you know, not complain about heat or lack of it, and you know, live with the people. You said you were Peace Corps early on, so you remember the in-country payments were very small.
Yes.
So we just did have enough to take care of ourselves, and then money was set aside for when you finished.
Well, I was in the Peace Corps in Malaysia, 66 to 68, a few years after you, and I remember I was getting $160 a month to live on. Had to pay my rent, buy my food, take care of everything.
Right.
And it worked out fine.
Bolivia was less than half of that.
Oh my goodness, well.
But it was a country that was and still is a poor country. Like most of Latin America, there's an upper layer of people who do well in business success, and then there's a great number of people who live on next to nothing.
Take me back just a little bit. You put in an application. In short order, you found out you were accepted or invited to go into a training program?
Yeah, I guess by the standards of '61, it was short order.
Okay.
You know, nowadays you expect to hear an email confirmation or something fairly quickly, and you waited and you checked the mail every day. Perhaps a telegram would show up. So I don't really remember how long it was. But
were you in your application? Did you designate that you wanted to go to Bolivia or to South America, or was it just up in the air and you were selected or informed that we'd like you to go? How did that work?
There was some expression of interest, and I did say Latin or Central America.
Okay.
So that was the general expression of interest.
Well, to this day, somebody applying to the Peace Corps could express an interest in going to a certain place that they wanted to. There's no guarantee. There's still no guarantee. There never was a guarantee that you would go to a place that you desired to go. Your background equipped you for a variety of things in the early Peace Corps scheme of programs, and so they invited you to go. They told you what were you going to do in the Peace Corps when you...
Well, the general term in those early days often was community development, which is a sort of umbrella under which all kinds of things. In one community, we actually dug and laid pipe for a water system because they didn't have one. In another community, they had open trench sewers. Well, many parts of the world have open trench sewers, but there are still ways of covering them so kids don't fall in or get pollution or whatever. So we worked on things like that. There was some teaching. Some of the women who had either experience or maybe training as nurses did things with mothers, prenatal care, infant,
public health
child care. So you would call that public health, even though we didn't really have anybody who was an RN. We had no one who was an MD. We had people who were mothers. We had one woman in her 60s who was a grandmother. So she said, well, I learned a lot of this stuff the hard way, so I can share what I learned. And what was interesting about her is we don't consider 62 to be old at all. I certainly don't. And in the community where this woman was, no one lived beyond 40. So they had never seen anybody 60 years old, and the little kids would come up and they'd want to touch her. And they'd look at her, and they'd pull her hair because it was white. Because
great curiosity.
You know, there was girls were pregnant at 14, and then you know, at 28 you have grandchildren, and by the time you're 40 something's happened and you're not here anymore. So, this woman had a grand time, very relaxed, unflappable.
The people of, all right, so you, we have, if we were looking at our map of Bolivia, you were, went to the capital of La Paz, or where were you assigned?
The main airport for Bolivia was the airport near La Paz. And what's interesting is, I may be wrong, but I think it's the world's highest commercial airport. It's 13,000 feet, 4,000 meters, which means if you can imagine an airport sitting on top of Mauna Kea.
Let's get off wearing our
And-
oxygen mask.
Yeah, and the airplanes had trouble getting up that high or getting airborne once they were up there. And although by 1962 we were beginning to see jet airplanes, there were none flying there. So it was all four-engine
Prop
DC-6s.
plane.
We all went to La Paz, and there was an in-country orientation that went on for several weeks. So we were all in a pretty low-end hotel type 2-to-a-room, shower down the hall, eat dormitory style, and then we went out to Sucre, Cochabamba, Santa Cruz, the various major centers from which by jeep or by something we got out to towns and villages. Some of them didn't really have names. So that's how the distribution worked.
And you said you used the term Bolivia One. Were you the first Peace Corps group to come to Bolivia?
Yep. In the beginning, now I don't know what happened by the time you got in, but the Peace Corps groups were named by their country and numbered. So there was Bolivia 1, Bolivia 2, Bolivia 3.
Exactly.
So
I was
Bolivia
Malaysia
2.
15.
So I don't know how long that system was continued. Maybe it's still going on.
So you went out into the countryside, and at this point you knew you were going to be doing community development.
Right.
But had
Which-
any idea of what that actually was going to entail for you specifically?
There had been some prep work so that the two of us who went into a particular place, it was explained, here's what the need is. There's a need to get water from yonder hillside down into the village because right now they're walking up and getting it in some container and carrying it on their shoulders. And so there was no PVC, so pipe was going to be metal pipe and it should be buried, so picks and shovels and digging. And we weren't to do all the work. The idea was that we would help the community to own this project. And I think that is the genius of the Peace Corps, because so often there's a government contract and a contractor does the work and then leaves, and the people aren't all that
There's no ownership.
owning of it. But in this community, people who could would come out. Sometimes it was a different group every day. The food situation in Bolivia was fairly grim. They really did not have a caloric availability. I don't know the figures, but I'm assuming they probably lived on well under 1,000 calories a day. And up in the Altiplano, the main staple food was a tiny potato, which resembled a billiard ball in more ways than one. I mean, you could cook
very
it. You
appetizing.
could cook it all day and still have some difficulty eating it. We often had chicken, and we joked and we ate it, but we said this chicken died of old age. You know, it had been
Or
around
altitude sickness.
doing whatever chickens were supposed to do until it finally expired, and then they would eat it. So there was some farming. It was very simple farming, no mechanization whatsoever.
So the people of Bolivia, what did they think about you and your teammate? You're the first incarnation of Peace Corps. You're an American. Did they know about America? In the
Well,
area
they
you were?
knew nothing about America except that we're rich.
Okay. And did they?
And so they were quite accepting. I really do think that Americans as people are liked. I mean, Americans are friendly, we're gregarious, we're generous as a people.
Were they?
And
Had they been briefed that
Well,
these gringos were coming in?
right.
A couple of young.
there was some other precedent. Church people had
Okay.
come.
All right. Certainly.
Each village had a Catholic priest and a village church or a parish church, and so there was some knowledge of people who are not like us, somebody from somewhere else who's here.
Precedent of people coming in to
But when
do good
the
work.
idea that you're an American, the word gringo was used, but I'm not sure anybody had any idea what a gringo really was. And a funny incident occurred while we were in country. A U.S. Air Force airplane full of food, blankets, things for USAID stuff, landed in La Paz. And a local radio station guy went out and introduced himself to the warrant officer who was flying the airplane, and the warrant officer's name was Cruz. Good Hispanic name.
Yes.
Except Mr. Cruz had grown up not speaking a word of Spanish. He could not speak anything but English. And so they made a big to-do. Oh, you know, hermano, brother Cruz, no habla español, ¿por qué? You know, why? And it was quite and Cruz was warm and friendly, and he shook hands, and he looked at kids. And so I think many Bolivians saw the United States as a source of stuff. Like in the village, there would be food appear, and it would say in English, "From your friends in the USA." And it would be distributed usually by the Catholic priest, because he was the one person in the village that everybody trusted.
Yeah.
Everybody else was related to somebody, and there were problems. But I'm pretty sure we were the first Americans who were in the country and stayed there, and we were there day in and day out, week in and week out. You know, there were vacations. You got time off in Malaysia to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Most of us said, well, we'll go somewhere in Bolivia.
Right.
Nobody went to Lima. Nobody went to Rio de Janeiro. Nobody had any
See
money to
another
go
part
anywhere
of the
anyway.
country, sure. Well, tell me a little bit about the people. You were working, you got them involved. They were easy to work with. They were, what did you learn about them? And on our theme of Bring the World Home, what have you kept from that experience over the years that you can share with our audience?
Well, I think one of the things maybe many Peace Corps people come home with is that there are many people in the world who have much less than we have, but they live and they're happy and they laugh and they make love and they make parties and they have a life.
Yes.
And it's not a life built around, do you have the newest model of this, do you have the latest version of that, because they've never seen this and that.
Right.
And that's a lesson that I think you absorb in the Peace Corps. It's not like you're a tourist looking at it, but you're a part of it. You realize these people really don't have anything.
Do you feel like you had that insight prior to being a volunteer?
I
that
think
people
I
are
did.
like that?
I had been in Mexico as a high school kid.
All right, so you had
And
some exposure, some worldliness.
I was interested when I was in Mexico. I went with a church group, but I was a bad church boy. And I was interested in kids and people and how they lived, and I would peer into people's courtyards, and sometimes they'd invite me in, and if they offered me something, I would partake, and I was warned, oh, you're going to get really sick, and then we're going to have trouble, and you're going to go to the hospital. And I think I had some of those insights, but when you have lived with people on a daily basis and see what they do in life, you know, how they make their day, what it is that constitutes a woman's work for the day, and how hard they work. There was the underlying issues, which is still a political issue with Bolivia. Many people in Bolivia have intestinal parasites, and they are in pain. There is GI tract pain. And the way they treat the pain is they chew coca leaves mixed with something.
Lime.
And they are often chewing something. Now, I don't know, in Malaysia, was there betel nut?
Yes.
Was that an issue there?
Yeah.
Of course, the United States wants Bolivia and President Morales to either eradicate or control the growing of coca, and Bolivians say, we're not drug addicts. We need this stuff. We hurt. And you realize that people who live with chronic pain, it's never better. It's not like they can throw up or it'll pass. It's like it's there. And you see people, it changed. I was a non-smoker. In fact, I used to be a non-drinker of anything but milk and orange juice. And you realize different ways of coping with life.
Yes.
That helped.
So your experiences with these people, would you term it successful? After your tour of duty, did you feel like you really accomplished something that would justify the State Department's expense, taxpayers' expense to send you off to Bolivia in the first place?
I really do. It's quite interesting. You've worked on a water system, and there comes the big day when you're going to find out whether it works or not.
Okay.
So you let water in the upper end, and you wait, figuring out if it's coming down, and when it finally comes out of this pipe. And that's what it was. There wasn't even a faucet. It was just a pipe that went into a large container.
Mm-hmm.
But little children are excited, and they're clapping, and you see smiles on women's faces because they don't have to hike up there anymore. They have water here, and it's safe. There's a good feeling that that you've done something. And I went away feeling that, well, they helped build this, so they're going to help take care of it. It's not something that was done for them.
Right. Something so simple and basic is that we tend to take for granted.
Right.
To them was a major accomplishment. By virtue of your presence, you shepherded the idea along. Why do you think they couldn't come up with that idea themselves in the first place?
Well, that's a fascinating political question, to me anyway, of why can't people solve their own problems? I think there's a dynamic of sharing.
Okay.
And we don't know, in the beginning, somebody invented the wheel, all the different things that got done with it. The Hawaiians had the wheel, but it was in a pump drill. They didn't put wheels underneath something and move stuff with them. And maybe there's a feeling in some traditional cultures, we've always done it this way, and it works, and so there's no real impetus to change. Americans are practical. We want a newer, quicker, faster way of doing whatever we're doing because we're impatient. We're in a hurry to go watch the ball game or something. And yet, you're sharing, and you're not just, we know it all and you're kind of dumb and we're going to teach you. There was none of that. And lots of time spent just talking. We heard stories. We heard stories about children and stories, traditional stories.
Any that you recall in the few minutes we have left that you'd like to share?
Well, even then, I was interested in political science. I teach history and political science at Chaminade University, and I was interested in hearing Bolivians talk about the days when they used to have a seaport. And there was a war with Peru, which Bolivia lost. And Peru claimed this little piece of land and said the Chamizal belongs to Peru and not to Bolivia. And that they felt a great sense of loss because there's two landlocked countries in South America, Uruguay and Bolivia.
Yes.
There's no way out except
No
overland.
rivers,
There's not
no
even
access.
Not even any really good rail service, because if you go out of the country to the east, you're going down into the Amazon basin, but that's the far western parts of Brazil, and that's tricky.
Yes.
So they had this sense of loss, even though they knew their country was named for Simón Bolívar, and they were very proud of that. We are the only country named for the great one, and they had a certain sense of pride there.
Yes.
Then there were simple stories. You know, let me tell you about my uncle, and he did this or that, or my grandfather did this or that, something of that sort. So.
Well, again, in the 4 or 5 minutes that we have left,
Okay.
you are a professor, adjunct professor of history at Chaminade now. Do you still find yourself relating your experiences in Bolivia as a Peace Corps volunteer to your students nowadays? Is there?
I do.
Is there a connection, a psychic connection?
Subsequently traveled to other places, but I think some of the sensitivities are definitely there. And instead of teaching about somebody else, I always try to look at how they view things. And rather than saying this is their point of view and this is our point of view, but try to look at things from other people's vantage points.
Well, one of the vantage points that I'd like to bring up is you've brought a couple things to share with our audiences. What can you tell me about this brass shoe here?
The brass shoe is funny, and I'm not
fast.
entirely convinced it's authentic, but I bought it being told that this was a conquistadores stirrup.
Oh.
That it was attached, this was the leather strap, and that on the horse the foot would have gone in, and that would have protected against brambles, thorns.
Sense. Sure.
It may be that somebody has made it as a replica and was selling it to a dumb tourist who didn't know the difference, but I liked it.
Yeah.
And it hangs in my living spaces.
That's quite interesting. And the carving here, is that
I found
something typical of?
A remarkable level of woodworking in Bolivia that I was totally unprepared for. I mean, even in the market of La Paz, the plain open market, there were woodworkers who were sitting there with this dark teak-like wood, working on it very carefully and slowly with tools. This particular person, I have 3 of these, I only brought one. It's a figure, an Aymara or Quechua. Those are the native Bolivians that primarily live in the Altiplano. They were the original, they're sort of the Inca of Bolivia, if you will. And the Aymara dialect and the Quechua dialect are far more frequently heard than Spanish in parts of the country. I mean, if you speak Spanish, they know what you're saying, but they won't talk to each other in Spanish.
Oh.
So this is an Indian, if you will.
Sure.
And of course, the current president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, is a part native Bolivian. So he's very proud of that. You may have seen pictures of him. He does not dress up. He dresses down. He wears native clothes.
Is Peace Corps a good thing still?
In fact, I think one of the changes, in the early days it was young people and some older people, but there are now people in their 40s who have retired or retiring, or they are in a place in life where the children are no longer underfoot, and they have some skills.
Well, that's an excellent recommendation.
To take a couple of years.
I appreciate your insight and your ability to share with our audience here in Hawaii. To our viewers, thank you again for joining us this evening at Bring the World Home. We invite you to go to the Peace Corps website. We invite you to talk to volunteers and consider the idea of volunteering for work in our country. We hope that this program has been informative to you, and we wish you a very good night.